Welcome back to Hardball. Did Republican efforts to suppress the vote backfire this time? In dozens of states, they made efforts to keep people, especially minorities and poor people, from getting to the ballot box. They shortened early voting periods and tried to put in place much stricter voter photo ID rules in many places. Well, it didn't work. Minority turnout remained steady from 2008. In some states, it even increased, like Ohio. And some civil rights leaders say it was actually those attempts at voter suppression that drove voters out to vote, even if it meant standing in line for hours, and even if they weren't that strong for Obama. They just wanted to prove they could vote. What's clear is that the Republican Party has a deeper problem right now. It's failing to attract minority voters, largely due to the policies in sports, I would argue, and the rhetoric some of its leaders and their cronies have been using. This year, President Obama beat Mitt Romney by 44 points among Hispanic voters, and only 6% of African Americans voted for Romney. What's going on? What can the Republican Party do about it? Big questions. J.C. Watts, of course, is former U.S. Congressman from Oklahoma, and Judith Brown-Deannis is the co-director for the Advancement Project, a civil rights and voting groups. Thank you so much. Let me ask Judith to start with a little bit of homework here that we couldn't do, but we're counting on you to do. I have got anecdotal. People come up to me and said, I was so angry about some of this suppression talk and attempts in all those 30-some states. African Americans would say, you know, I got out there and voted. I know people. What evidence do you have that it really worked in the favor, or rather put it this way, against the Republicans for trying to do that?
Well, number one, we know that they tried to do it so that they could have partisan advantage. But we do know it backfired because, number one, organizations like mine were able to stop them dead in their tracks by bringing litigation. But two, we know that voters were standing in line. In fact, I stood in line in Maryland for 7 hours. And I will tell you, Chris, that the discussion in that line in an all-black precinct, 7 hours, people said, this is about voter suppression. They don't want us to vote, but this is an old playbook. People are used to this. They see it coming and they say, no, we're not going to allow them to silence us and take our voters away. So 7, 8 hours, people were steady in their commitment in places like Florida and Ohio, where they tried the hardest to suppress the vote.
Well, here we're looking, ironically, at a bunch of people who are all white from, I can tell, the line here, a very long, slow-moving line where they were held up, too. How do you know it was aimed at minorities?
Well, we know that the laws themselves were aimed at minorities. I mean, the laws that, the early voting laws, and we know in Florida, we already have the head of the GOP, the Florida GOP, and former Governor Christ admitting that, in fact, they did it for partisan gain. They did it for their own party so that they could win. But they didn't win.
JC, I want you to respond to these rather provocative comments here. Since 2011, at least 34 states introduced legislation to require photo identification to vote. In all but one case, the legislation was introduced by Republicans, according to the Brennan Center for Justice. In total, the 18 states on this map passed photo voter ID requirements, though in some cases there have been legal or federal challenges to the new laws. The purpose of the laws were clear to everyone, to make it difficult for typically Democratic constituents to vote. Listen to what Mike Turzai, the majority leader of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, said when he found out he was talking about these voter laws. Let's listen.
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
Well, that's pretty clear. Earlier this year, Bill Clinton talked about what he called the blatant voter suppression efforts down in Florida. Let's listen.
How much will the vote be lessened or reduced by the fact that in Florida, except for 4 counties, the pre-election voting, advanced voting, has been cut down to 8 days and doesn't include the Sunday before the election, which is an arrow aimed straight at the heart of the African-American churches who pull up the church buses on the Sunday before election and take elderly people who have no cars or people who are disabled to the polls so they can vote. In my lifetime, nobody's ever done anything quite this blatant.
Well, your thoughts about this whole thing. I have a lot of thoughts about this, but you are running potentially for RNC chair against Rights Priebus. Your thoughts about the whole question of suppression, what we call dog whistles, clever attempts to get the white vote out, to be angry about the black leadership in the country right now. Your thoughts generally. Well, you're a politician, a Republican, an African-American. You got it all going here.
Well, I've heard you, Chris. I've seen you in the evenings talk about the dog whistles, and that's quite fascinating. I mean, all the
well, they're aimed at me. They're not aimed at you. I know. I can hear the whistle.
Well, but you don't vote Republican. I think there's going to be speculation in an election year. There's going to be a lot of different things. The voter ID thing, I really don't have any problem with that, because I think.
Who is it aimed at?
I think it should be, if it was aimed at trying to suppress vote, they were doing it for the wrong reasons. Anything beyond trying to keep integrity in the voting process, I would disagree with. But it's going to be a lot of speculation, and people use their motives for why it was done and why it wasn't done. I happen to believe that in the black community, in 2008, President Obama got 96% of the black vote. In this election, he got 93%. So 3%, he got 3 points less in this election. I don't think it had anything to do with voter suppression and all that kind of stuff. That 3 points didn't go to Republicans.
Why do I hear
because
that?
Republicans don't
Respond,
have
Judith, to that.
Well,
because I hear it. You hear it differently.
Let me continue to respond. You've had a lot of intro and a pretty lengthy
There's more coming.
intro here. But the fact is, I think that 3%, it didn't go to Republicans. It didn't go to the president, but it didn't go to Republicans, because I think Republicans have dropped the ball in terms of trying to establish deeper relationships with these communities. And the fact that someone might have speculation about voter suppression and so forth, well, it tends to carry a lot more weight,
well, I mean,
because
the problem
Republicans
is that
just have no credibility.
The problem
Judith,
is that this isn't speculation. I mean, we have admissions by Governor Christ. I mean, there's no reason for him to lie about the fact that the Republican Party in Florida actually did this so that Democrats could lose. And then on top of it, really targeted African Americans and Latinos, who are the loyalists to the Democratic Party. And so we're not speculating about this. We know the hardcore facts are this was an attempt to take the vote away from African Americans, the elderly, young people, and Latino voters.
Well, here's some of the elevator music from this campaign. We all have heard this. We call this, as you know, a montage. One reason so many minority voters were turned off to the Republicans may be the way leaders in the party use ethnic dog whistles against President Obama. Listen to some examples. Judge for yourself.
President Obama is the most effective food stamp president in American history.
The men and women all over America who have worked hard to build these businesses, their businesses, from the ground up, is how our economy became the envy of the world. It is the American way, and I wish this president would learn how to be an American.
People have birth certificates. He doesn't have a birth certificate. Now, he may have one, but there's something on that person, maybe religion, maybe it says he's a Muslim. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't want that, or he may not have one. But I will tell you this. If he wasn't born in this country, it's one of the great scams of all time.
These aren't exactly cheerleaders for black participation in the Republican Party, are they? Donald Trump, Mitt Romney genuflected to that guy in the campaign.
Let
the Congressman Judith, let JC talk. I don't know how you react to that. I want to know.
Well, Chris, on the birther thing, I think that's a losing issue.
Well, why are the Republicans pushing?
Hey, I can't speak for Republicans. You don't hear me.
I thought you wanted to chair the party.
Well, that's the reason.
Well, you're going to have to speak for these clowns.
For that reason. But you have to carry baggage of Democrats that I've heard you over the years disagree with them. So I do think that there has to be a different tone set.
Do you agree that these are dog whistles? These are signals to people we don't like black presidents. You don't think that's food stamps?
The birther thing.
And he an American?
But the food stamps,
you never
the
heard me say that, and I think it's unfair for John to paint with a broad brush and say that all Republicans agree.
Well, what Sununu was one of their number one surrogates they were putting out.
But
he was all over the place.
But Chris, I was critical of the Romney folks. They had no diversity in their campaign, and I was critical in 2008 because they had no diversity.
That also plays into...
Judith, we got to make some news here. It's a news show. We want to make some news. Mr. Watts, U.S. Congressman Watts, you've been elected to office before. Will you seek the Republican chairmanship against Mr. Reince Priebus?
Chris, this is, I've kind of gotten caught up in this whirlwind, and this thing's kind of taken a life of its own. Everybody points fingers and whistles when things
don't go
well. But the fact that the fingers that I'm pointing, I've been pointing running for 20 years.
Yeah, I know.
To say that Republicans...
No, you're like Jack Kemp. You're a good guy on this stuff.
That they have done a poor job in establishing deeper relationships, and that's my point. I think it starts at the RNC, and they keep saying...
Okay, we're going to have to wait and see if you run.
They keep saying, oh, we're going to do better, we need to do better. They never do anything
I'm waiting to see if
it.
Michael Steele runs, my colleague here, if he runs. If you run both, I want to see if you both run or either run. I don't think he's going to run, but I think you might run. Thank you, J.C. Watts. Please tell us when you do. Judith Brown, Dianis, thank you very much for coming. Happy holidays to both you folks.